Grace and Ella Whelan, who are here. Good to see
Good
you
morning,
both this morning. Pete, shall we start with the eye, looking at the budget?
Yeah. I haven't brought my papers with me because every front page is the same.
Yeah.
It's just for or against, and it's scary. What I think is sad is that, and I've got to be careful what I have to say because I'll get slagged off on social media. We in this country, when we are successful, we're very jealous. In America, they embrace success. Now, all they've done in the papers is pick this headline: the rich are getting richer. Whether it works or not with the bankers not getting the tax on the bonus anymore, whether they keep the money here, whether they keep their children in the school, or whether they still live abroad, I don't know. But all I do know is that we need to get more jobs. We need to embrace businesses coming to this country because the world after the pandemic needs everybody. We need entrepreneurs. It's all very well everyone having a go at the rich. And there are a lot of rich that are a waste of space, but there's a lot of rich that are bringing money and building companies, and it is a long-term solution, if it is a solution at all. The pound has dropped, as we know, but the pound always does this because there are an awful lot of people making money out of the pound. Make no mistake, there are a lot of financiers who are having a ball over this. With the pound dropping, they'll have moved their currencies. And it always goes back to the dollar every time anyway. The dollar is always a strong currency. And I think it is a huge gamble that they've taken. I don't understand it, and I'm sure an awful lot of people don't understand it. But what I think is sad with the headlines of the rich, there is an awful lot being given to other people as well. And let's not forget that.
Also, I mean, Andrew in Livingston's been in touch with a fair point. He says the higher the rates are, the less the tax is received by the Exchequer. It was illustrated in the period after 1979. The top tax rate was reduced by the Conservatives to 40%, but people returned to the UK and the tax take went up.
Didn't the Rolling Stones move back? Because the tax was right.
Yeah.
You know,
yes, that happens a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, a lot of people move back. We need businesses, that's for sure. We've had a terrible time with the pandemic. We've also got a terrible time now with the heating bills, etc., which we've been indoctrinated into and told 1,000 times that we're going to be in a real doo-doo over it. I'm sure an awful lot of people listening now don't understand it, but we've just seen the headlines. She's taking a huge gamble, and so is he, but it might just pay off.
The Guardian, of course, has absolutely come down harshly against it and said this has just been a budget for the rich.
Yes, and one of their lead writers, Jonathan Friedland, has gone as far as to describe it as a declaration of class war. You know, the things that they pick out in the front page of The Guardian, you know, as a quote from the Labour Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, who's describing the mini budget as casino economics. And there's a lot of focus on, I think, the fact that is true, which is that this is, you know, risk is the word. This is a big gamble. Kwarteng and Truss are quite open about the fact that they're, you know, making a virtue of the fact that they're taking a risk and taking a gamble, which, by the way, I don't think even those of us who have a different kind of political or economic stance to them think is a bad thing.
Well, the last bit didn't work. I mean, something's got to be done, and if you're not going to go for what Rishi Sunak was putting forward, then you're going to do something radical, aren't you?
I think something radical and big ideas is always to be welcomed in politics, particularly when we're at times when something, you know, big ideas need to happen. I'm forever blue in the face talking about the need for big ideas. But I think the important thing to understand with this budget is that actually it's, even though it's being described as radical in terms of the extent of the tax cuts or the amount of money that's being talked about, you know, £400 billion of extra borrowing, £45 billion of tax cutting, the kind of politics behind it is not radically different from anything we've heard even throughout the Tory leadership. The entire discussion about the economy has been about whether or not to cut taxes, how to move a bit of tax here, a bit of tax there. This might just be in larger quantities. But I think the important thing to understand is if you're giving over extra space for, as Pete says, for businesses to come in and invest, or to kind of promote the idea that Britain is a great place for businesses to come and do startups and things like that, you don't just have to cut taxes, you also have to have a political motivation behind that, which says what are the things that we need, what are the kind of industries that need to have innovation put into them, what are the, for example, the question time was in Grimsby this week, what is it that, what kind of industry that Grimsby needs to reinvent itself, reinvigorate itself, and there's none of that kind of substantial underlying, kind of like the bricks and mortar of how you
get that
growth.
It's a mini budget.
You wouldn't get it in a mini budget, but I think I don't think that they should also use that as a cloak to protect themselves, because we are in extraordinary times. And if you look at, for example, the £60 billion cap on energy bills, well, no one's going to say that's a terrible thing. Okay, that sounds pretty good. But there is no, the key thing that we know about rising energy bills is that part of the problem is there's been no investment or no whiff of the of investment in new energy sources. There's been some sounds made about
we've
fracking.
got the fracking now,
which is fine. There's been some noise about fracking, but fracking is not going to solve all our ills. So what I'm talking about is. I just kind of almost want to sort of pour cold water on the coals and say we really don't know how much change this is going to make until we get any kind of substantial detail.
Interesting too with this mini budget. What great timing for the Labour Party conference. They're going to have a field day. They're going to have a field day on this.
Yeah, they are. Mind you, the Express saying, Pete, we've got the courage to bet big on Britain, and the bet here is growth. Isn't it?
Yeah, we've got to, and also we've got to get a workforce. Many companies still have not got a workforce. They can't get people back to work, and all people say is, well, we need better wages because of the cost of living. Well, we've got to start somewhere. I'm sorry, I came from the day when I was at school and I had a job. Well, I had two jobs. I worked in a dairy and I also worked as a paper boy because I wanted money. I wanted to do well. Nobody's given me anything, and that's nothing. I've worked in dreadful places. I've done anything. If I've got to clean toilets, I'll clean toilets. I had to make a living and my mother, who was a single mum because my dad went, never got any benefits. I think we've got to start work again.
We pride ourselves on being a welfare state. Have we gone too far with that?
I think so, without any shadow of a doubt.
I don't know that I'd agree with that, because part of the issue at the moment is that whether or not you think the system of benefits works in the abstract, the problem we've got at the moment is that we're supposed to have this safety net, which is universal credit or anything. It's not even nearly matching inflation. So the safety net isn't keeping people safe. It's not working. And if you look at the rewind back and zoom out from the sort of immediate detail of the tax cuts and look at the politics driving Trussonomics and our new Prime Minister, Kwasi Kwarteng's been, and Liz Truss actually throughout the Tory leadership campaign, have been sort of champing at the bit to talk about crackdowns on strikes. Part of this mini budget has been Kwarteng being quite clear on how he's going to be tougher on benefit claimants, something that, again, it's not necessarily to be expected in a mini budget, this kind of jab at saying, well, if you don't fill out your online searches, you're going to be kicked off universal credit. And I think all of that sending
fair enough, though. I mean, look, I've never claimed benefits, so I don't know. But you're meant to get the benefits whilst looking for work. So if you're not fulfilling your side of the bargain, then you kicked out. I mean, that's a fair enough point, isn't it?
I don't think no one's arguing that you should just be allowed to game the system or things like that. But I mean, I back when it was called JSA, I've been on JSA, and anyone who's been through that system knows that the actual process of finding a job is always more difficult than they make it out to be. And indeed, we have full employment at the moment, so the picture is slightly complicated because that lots of people are finding themselves offered jobs that don't, pay a pittance, don't have any kind of benefits themselves, 0 hours contract, and aren't able to make it work. But the kind of broader point I'm making is that this is a government that is, and to move on to my next front page, which is the Daily Mail, talking about a true Tory budget and how this is an exciting new moment of honesty for the Conservatives, is how they're framing it. That finally they're not pretending to be kind of I think probably what a lot of people described Rishi Sunak as throughout the pandemic, which was, yes, a bit of a hero for doing the right thing, but also not a true Conservative. there is this sort of political moment in which I think Truss in particular is trying to stake out her claim as maybe Thatcher 2.0, maybe something like that. We noticed throughout the Tory leadership that she was kind of almost cosplaying as the Iron Lady in a way. And I think you have to read all of that behind it. And for someone who, is from the left, as I am, who's, I don't go as far as saying this is a class war because I just don't think it's substantial enough to warrant that kind of description. Yeah. But you have to know that there's a lot of signalling going on here, which isn't, most importantly, isn't going to help your average person sitting at home watching GB News looking at their energy bills. Right?
We're also living in a world where nobody gives anybody a chance. It's now. It's got to happen now. We need that money now. It's like football managers, they're sacked after 2 games now. And we can't. The problem is a huge problem. We've had the pandemic. I hate keeping going on about it. We had furlough, which cost billions upon billions.
But the pandemic was really significant. Yeah. We should keep going on about it, and not like in a boring way.
I'm not sure how we could possibly expect not to be suffering.
Yeah, and we all said through it. We said it on here. We said many times.
It's wonderful that people are being given money and helped out, but that money's come from somewhere and has to be paid back.
And there's still 5.5 million plus people didn't get anything in furlough and got no help at all. And you don't see them marching in the streets. We tried it once. It didn't work.
If we accept that maybe the benefit system is not perfect at all, and to a certain extent, and I know there'll be a lot of people watching right now who will feel that it's actually too generous and it's stopping people going into those very sorts of jobs that you were describing, shouldn't we, instead of giving out more in benefits, actually just be tightening up the employment market, making sure that people, if they work, get a decent salary or get a decent wage and are looked after.
What do you say about that? Now, let's take the catering industry. I've got lots of friends who are restaurateurs in the north of England who are struggling for staff, absolutely struggling for staff. And the staff saying, well, you're not paying the right wages. Well, they're not getting any wages because they can't pay the money because of heating bills, because of costings, because of the pandemic, because they're fighting to keep their head above water. We've got to get people back to work. There are many jobs out there that need filling. I mean, the trains are in chaos. There's 2 strikes coming, or 3 strikes, but the trains are in chaos because there's nobody on, nobody working.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I mean, it's interesting though, isn't it? Do you know what I was going to say? It's just escaped me.
Oh, you're having another moment.
I'm having a
no, that's
senior
because
moment.
I nearly interrupted you. I'm sorry about that.
No.
I was just saying that maybe if you're watching at the moment, stop it.
No, it's my senior moment.
No. I was just wondering if you're watching at the moment and you did one of those sorts of jobs that Pete was talking about there, instead of even thinking of claiming what we used to call unemployment benefit. What sort of jobs did you do, and did you think this isn't worth it, or did you just get on with it? Because
well, do you know what? I'll tell you what it reminds me of. My dad was laid off in the 80s, and ended up, he decorated. He went and painted the vicarage and all that stuff. It's anything, and it's always been my philosophy that if I needed a job, I would go. It doesn't matter what it is, but like you clean the toilets, do whatever.
Yeah.
Because my dad always said, the world does not owe you a living.
Absolutely, and that is a great statement. When I was a lot younger, I was out of work for 6 months. I was too proud to claim the dole. I was too proud because that was the way I was brought up. Yeah. I'm annoyed with myself afterwards, but that's the way benefits were in those days.
And don't you think things have changed now, and that a lot of people may be too proud to take a grotty job? Do you think that's fair?
I don't know. I think to flip it a different way, there's and that's like I used to wash dishes at school at lunchtime because I wanted an extra £5. I think lots of people this sometimes gets painted as a kind of generational thing, and that might be unfair. But there is the question is who should pay for the failures of the economy. So Pete has rightly outlined that, for example, because of rising heating bills, industries can't pay the kind of wages that would make any difference to someone's livelihood. Well, does that mean that workers then should say, do you know, I'll just suck it up and sacrifice it, and I'll go in and I'll take rubbish money and I'll live a miserable life with my lights off? Well, no. And I think, put that feeds into the discussion about the strikes, which is... Why should anyone do that?
The world owe you a living, though? You've got to get off your backside to do it yourself.
But it's not that. I think you wouldn't. From what I'm saying, you wouldn't argue then that people sit on their backside and say, "Well, I'll just wait for the sun to shine." But it's that the way in which you talk about organising economy, to go back to the budget, is that you have to argue and put pressure on politicians for some kind of substantial change. You were interviewing a guest at the top of the show who was, talking about the fact that she didn't like the phrase trickle down trickle down economics, and how actually this was just about investment. There is a level of this which it definitely seems like there is a kind of tinkering with tax at the top and no sort of substantial, put it this way, bricks and mortar in the ground, kind of, fundamental things that you can hold with your hand, change for the bottom. And I think that's not going to incentivise anyone to get back into a job.
Well, look, you guys are coming back in about less than an hour's time, actually. We'll talk more about it then. And if you're watching at the moment and you've got a view on this, did you do a grotty job? And I don't know, all of these sorts of problems that we're talking about now, what would you see as a solution? Then give us an email. It's gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting debate, isn't it? Now, a new study has found